Thank you for being here, getting the information, and let's get started.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. John Bradley. Dr. Bradley is an infectious disease pediatrician at Rady Children's Hospital here in San Diego. Take it away, Dr. Bradley.
Thank you very much, Heen. I am an infectious disease doctor, so viruses are what I do for a living, and a pandemic is like the most incredible situation for an infectious disease doctor. If it weren't so overwhelming, it would be a real amazing experience, but it's just been overwhelming. But my job is to try and take what I know from my background and 40 years in the field and try to make some sense out of it. And what I'd like to do this evening is to share with you the vaccines and how they protect and what they are, how they work, how we evaluate them, and a little bit about the safety, especially with what's in the news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, and then answer your questions. I'm just taking a 40,000 foot view here. There's so much more information out there, but my presentation is relatively short to allow you folks to ask questions, what's on your mind rather than what's on my mind. So here we go. I hope you can see the slides. So if there's any problem, Heen, please just let me know.
Dr. Bradley, can you reshare the presentation?
You can't see it. Okay. I'll have to back out. Thanks for letting me know.
You're among family here. This is an atmosphere where we all take care of each other. So don't worry.
Okay. So now you can see not the slide presentation mode, but the slide modes.
Mm-hmm.
And how's this now?
Perfect.
Are we good? All right. See, it's unusual that I can do something that works. Anyway, first I'm going to go over the vaccines that are FDA authorized. And so it's not quite approved. Usually when a vaccine's approved, there's like 40,000, 50,000, 100,000 people who've been immunized, and their data that the FDA collects over a couple of years. We're actually in a national emergency, as though you didn't know that, with coronavirus. So the FDA, by law, is allowed to do an expedited, still intensive, but an expedited evaluation of products in an emergency situation to allow us to use them and to allow manufacturers to make them and market them. And so authorization is what the term is rather than approval. So technically these vaccines aren't approved, but every company that's making these vaccines is going to go for an FDA approval. But if you need a year's worth of information, the companies won't be able to get approval until the end of this particular year. So I'm sure they'll all be approved. But I just wanted to let you know, for those of you who've been immunized, you usually have to sign a waiver that says, I realize this vaccine is not approved, and it's authorized. So it's very close. Two vaccines are mRNA vaccines, and I'll explain them in just a moment. One by Pfizer and one by Moderna, and they're like twin siblings. They're virtually identical. And then we have in the United States one adenovirus vector vaccine by Johnson & Johnson that owns a company, Janssen in Belgium, that actually is manufacturing the vaccine. And in other parts of the world, there's an AstraZeneca vaccine that's also an adenovirus vector. So these are respiratory tract viruses. And the Johnson & Johnson adenovirus is made very weak by engineering, and as is the AstraZeneca vaccine. But the AstraZeneca vaccine is actually a chimpanzee adenovirus rather than a human adenovirus, because so many people already have immunity to human adenoviruses. So the one thing in common with all these vaccines, whether you're mRNA or an adenovirus vaccine, they all protect the body by making the body think that it's being infected, and it creates immunity to the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. So the mRNA vaccines code for a spike protein, and the adenovirus vaccines code for a spike protein. And that's the part of the virus that protrudes out. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of the virus. And this is the part that attaches to the human cell, to the ACE receptor, and allows entry of the virus into the cell. If you cover this or knock out that spike protein, it's like putting blinders on the virus, and it can't find or attach to human cells. So it's a very good way to produce a protection. This is a picture of a virus with its spikes on the outside, and of all of the medical literature, publications, and journals, the best diagrams I found are from the New York Times. So I'm going to give them credit for all these pictures because they really help make the point. And I've shared these with our healthcare workers at Rady Children's Hospital also. So again, if you can prevent the virus from attaching to human cells by neutralizing the spikes, which are the spike proteins, you can prevent infection. So the information that codes for how to make the spike protein is inside the virus. So this little red area where it says spike protein gene, that's the nucleic acid instructions on how to make the spike protein. And of course, our bodies are made up of DNA that code for all the proteins that our body makes that make us who we are. So we know exactly which section of nucleic acid in the SARS coronavirus codes for the spike protein. And you can actually cut that out and duplicate it. And that's what these vaccine companies have done. They've taken this RNA segment and they've put it into a lipid nanoparticle. It's like the secret sauce, secret formulation. So only the FDA and the company know exactly how that's done. But both Pfizer and Moderna have their own secret formulas. But they put mRNA, the actual instructions for making spike protein, into the nanoparticles. And that's what's in the vaccine. So they give you the vaccine. These nanoparticles merge with your cell membranes in your arm where you get the vaccine. And the mRNA drops from these nanoparticles right into the cell. And your body thinks that this is mRNA it needs to make a protein from, just like it does all of your other proteins. So your ribosomes pick it up and start making spike protein, just like it's infected. And it creates spike proteins that are the exact replica of what you find in the virus itself. It looks exactly three-dimensional, looks exactly like what you get from the virus. And all of this work was done and validated, reproducible before they ever took this vaccine into animals or people. So these spike proteins migrate to the outside of the cell and bits and pieces of the spike protein as well. And they present themselves on the cell surface. So your body's never seen this spike protein before, and your body sees this as foreign. And whenever your body runs into foreign proteins, it thinks it's being infected, which is often the case, and it forms immunity. It attacks it, educates itself to what's infecting it, and then creates immunity to it. So your cells are tricked into making the virus spike protein. And then you've got a mechanism whereby your own cells that recognize this spike protein, thinking that your cell is truly infected, has two kinds of immunity. One of them is antibody, which is a protein. And these are pictures of the secreted antibodies. And these are a direct match for this particular spike protein. Your body figures out exactly how to make a protein to stick to the spike protein. And once it sticks to it, it knocks out this spike protein. It completely covers it, neutralizes it. So, so your immunity is for antibodies, a protein, and it also connects with other kinds of lymphocytes to instruct your body of how to make a lymphocyte that will also attack it in addition to the antibody. So this is just a picture of the antibodies that are produced by your body in response to the vaccine that are in your circulation. So anyone that's got the vaccine, if I do a blood test, I can find these proteins or antibodies against the spike protein. Anyone who's been infected by this virus, if we want to know if you've been infected, we take a blood test, you've got antibodies to spike protein. So once you've been infected or immunized, these antibodies are in your bloodstream, and the concentrations are pretty high starting a couple of weeks after your infection or the vaccine, and last for 6 to 12 months for most people. And as they're in your circulation, if a virus should even think of infecting you, these antibodies will recognize and stick to the spike protein and prevent the virus from infecting you. So this is a profound and important way that your body protects itself. And so these antibodies occur whether you've been infected or vaccinated. And it's all just against the spike protein, not against any of the other proteins that are in the coronavirus. So these are the other cells that are educated lymphocytes, killer T lymphocytes, that also patrol your bloodstream. And they get educated about the spike protein. And they're instructed that any cell in the body that has spike protein on the surface needs to be destroyed, because it means to your body that these cells have been infected. There's virus multiplying in them. And if they don't kill that cell, then there'll be thousands of more virus that will be released into the circulation to infect other cells. So your killer T cells are patrolling, looking for any cell that has spike protein on it. If you get the natural infection, so if someone should sneeze or cough on you, and you get a few of your cells that get infected with this coronavirus, they'll get spike protein on the surface of your nose or throat cells, and that will be recognized by the killer T cell, which will immediately kill that cell that's been infected in your body to protect you. So if we back up now, it's also possible, in addition to injecting mRNA into a vaccine recipient, a person, there's another way that you can deliver instructions for the spike protein that have been in other vaccines before. There's an Ebola DNA vaccine. So what you do is you take the same spike protein instructions, this red helix here, and you put it inside of an adenovirus. So the adenovirus thinks that this is one of its proteins. And what the scientists have done for both the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson vaccine is they make this virus super weak. They make it so that it can't replicate, it can't destroy cells. It just goes into your cell, injects its DNA so that your cell begins to create new viruses. That's what the adenovirus wants it to do. But this virus can't complete its cycle and fill your cell up with viruses and destroy your cell. So it's a replication deficient virus. It's a vehicle to deliver DNA into your cell. And that's what it does. You inject into the arm this adenovirus that contains spike protein DNA, and the adenovirus sticks to your cell, enters the cell, the way adenoviruses usually do, gets degraded, and then it injects the DNA thinking it's going to take over your cell. But it injects DNA, which is primarily spike protein DNA, into your cell. And then your cell makes mRNA. This is exactly the same mRNA that Pfizer and Moderna are injecting into you. So Pfizer and Moderna think, why go through all of this virus when you could just inject the mRNA? Well, we didn't know that the mRNA would be stable enough to actually cause an immune response when all of these trials were started a year and a half ago. And that's why, and mRNA is very unstable compared to these DNA viruses. So that's why you need -40 or -70 freezers to keep this mRNA stable. And thank goodness it turns out that mRNA is not only stable, but you can get it to go inside of cells and it makes spike protein just fine. Thank you very much. So we didn't know that when the vaccine trials started. And the adenovirus is very stable. It's super stable. So you just keep it in the refrigerator. So it's so much easier to take and immunize in rural areas where you don't need this intensely cold storage. So for the rest of the world, where AstraZeneca has been marketing their vaccine, where they don't have a lot of electricity and these massive freezers, these kinds of viruses are far more practical. So the Johnson & Johnson adenovirus vaccine is a single dose. AstraZeneca is a 2-dose vaccine regimen. There's a booster with AstraZeneca. And again, a year and a half ago, nobody knew if any of these vaccines would work. And so now AstraZeneca is probably thinking, well, we should have done it with just 1 dose like Johnson & Johnson. And I'm sure Pfizer and Moderna are thinking, gee, maybe we could get away with just 1 dose. We don't need the booster. We've never tested that. And the FDA will only authorize or approve vaccines for which the company's given them data. So for instance, if AstraZeneca doesn't do data on a 1-dose vaccine, then the AstraZeneca vaccine will only be approved for 2 doses. Same for Moderna and Pfizer. They're both approved for 2 doses. And unless the company collects data and presents it to the FDA, it's going to be two doses in the foreseeable future. So once the mRNA gets into the cell, this after the virus vaccines, and you make spike protein, all the stuff that we talked about with the mRNA vaccines, all of it happens. You get spike protein on the vaccinated cell, your body learns about it, your body produces antibodies and killer T cells that are in your circulation. So if you ever get exposed to the virus when you're outside, your body will handle it and you won't get a productive infection. Okay, let me go to the next. So I thought I would show you a moment in time that was incredibly important. December 10th, the first vaccine data were presented to the FDA's advisory committee. And the FDA has a group of regular folks, and I'm on one of the FDA's advisory committees for antibiotics. But the FDA gets advice from people who are in the community, who are taking care of patients, using vaccines, and none of them are employed by vaccine companies. They just want to make sure that people get protected with a safe and effective vaccine. So the data were presented to the biologics vaccine committee on December 10th. And this was shown, and I've probably shown this slide 100 times, but it's so important because I've got a red line here, an arrow, that points to 14 days after the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine, and the Moderna is exactly the same. And the blue line represents immunized people. And on the left, these are continuing ongoing coronavirus infections. And you can see if you got the vaccine, this line is flat. It doesn't go up with new infections. And it suggested to me on December 10th that 2 weeks after your first dose, you're basically protected. And when they went back and looked at this, you actually do have 80% protection. Now, Pfizer's never going to tell you that. FDA's not going to tell you that. All these people got another dose at 3 weeks, right? 21 days. And so everyone gets 2 doses, but I want you to see how effective the vaccine was 14 days after the first dose. And if you got the saltwater shot with no vaccine, and you were in the group that's the red line, that group just continued to be infected with coronavirus, no decrease. So in the same population, 20,000 people who were studied for the vaccine, really well studied. All the vaccines had 20,000 basically who were given vaccine and 20,000 who were given saltwater. But this shows how effective the vaccines were. So just to give you a little bit more information about a vaccine protection. So Pfizer went for prevention of any symptoms, but they also looked at prevention of serious infection and death. The FDA is always asking, does this prevent hospitalization? Does this prevent death? And the FDA has asked the company for all this information. So even if the company gives them a package of information and the company thinks it's all that they need, the FDA has absolute authority to say, no, we need more information on how you manufactured it. Is this safe, reproducible, safety? What's your extra safety data? What about this group? And the company has to get all that information back to the FDA before the FDA will even have this committee meeting. So the mRNA vaccines is about 90 to 95% effective in preventing any symptoms. No cold, no congestion, no headache. And of course, no hospitalization or death. So this was way better than anyone expected. The FDA said, we want you to be 50% effective. And if you're 50% effective, we'll let you market your vaccine. And it was 90 to 95%. So this was like incredible. So for the adenovirus vaccines, though, vaccine protection for any symptoms is about 60 to 70%, but it's almost 100% effective in preventing hospitalization and death, which obviously is the most important population metric for vaccine effectiveness. At my age, it doesn't matter if I get a bit of congestion or a headache. I just don't want to go to the hospital and I don't want to die. So I'd be happy with any of these vaccines. An interesting thing, though, is that as the virus mutates, the structure of the spike protein changes. And so there are some changes in the spike protein for both the South African strain, the B1351, and the variant from Brazil, the P1, which makes your protection against it not quite as good. So it turns out for the virus out of England, the B117, virtually all of these vaccines are just as effective for that as they are for the original strain, the Wuhan strain, that the vaccine was in populations in the United States, where it was originally checked for efficacy. So we're still learning about the vaccines, and obviously the 6-month data following the approval of these vaccines or authorization was just up for the Pfizer vaccine, and they need to send a package of information to the FDA, and Moderna should be up within the next week or two. So far at 6 months, the vaccine looks like it's both safe and effective. So there's no decrease in immunity yet. And so will it work longer than 6 months? It might. We just don't know. So for people that say, oh, you'll need a new vaccine after 6 months, we don't know what the data are. Maybe yes, maybe no. But until we see the data on protection, you won't need a vaccine for at least a year, is what most of us are thinking. And again, when you measure protection, it's not just the antibody. And a lot of people have antibody that decays over time. And if you're not actively exposed to the virus, your body's not like keeping all the troops out in your bloodstream watching for virus. It calms down and your antibody generally goes away, but your body's immunity remembers the coronavirus. And if you look at those killer T cells, you can find in people whose antibody has gone away, they've still got excellent killer T cell function. So the entire immune response can be brought back instantly. So at least at 6 months, it looks good. For the adenovirus vaccines, there are a few side effects. And you've heard about these in the media, both for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is the only one of these that's approved in the United States, but there's virtually identical data with the AstraZeneca vaccine. So the risk of a clot in the veins of your head inside your skull is about 1 in 7 million. There are 6 cases, 1 death. And these deaths were in young women. So if you look at the young adult females, the risk was 1 in a million. If you look at the risk of death of coronavirus infection, it's about 50 to 300 per 100,000 adults. And you can look online for this. You know, New York City was pretty high, Los Angeles was pretty high, San Diego's more in the 50 range. I think we do really well taking care of people here. So if you immunize 7 million adults, you will have basically saved between 3,500 to 21,000 deaths. And I don't want to sacrifice anybody, but when you look at public health, you tend to use intervention measures that are very much weighted in terms of preventing death, even if there's a risk that there will be a few people who may suffer side effects from the vaccine. A very important public health approach to both medicines and vaccines. The other thing that the CDC and the FDA are going to do is figure out what else was going on with these young women. And some of the preliminary data was presented to another federal advisory committee to the CDC. And there wasn't any particular factor. Some of the young women were obese, which is a risk factor for obesity, for clots anyway, but not all of them. And actually from other studies where there's toxicity, if you ask if they're taking any other herbal remedies or medicines, you know, you go into a sort of health food store and you can buy all kinds of things that aren't regulated by FDA, and some of which the FDA takes off the shelves if they find out that there's a risk. But anyway, the CDC is looking to see if there's any other factors. We know they died after getting the vaccine. We don't know if the vaccine was the complete cause, but we're getting to the bottom of that. So that's a case control study where they look at these 6 women and then find another group of young women of the same age, same region, and what all sorts of things were they exposed to. So you'll hear much more about that. So having been on an FDA advisory committee, I can tell you that especially in the current administration, that the FDA, their job, everyone there is for safety and efficacy. And they don't talk about how well the drug works and is it safe. It's, is the drug safe? And if it is, does it work? So they define the risk of side effects. They define the severity of side effects. So if you get a bit of rash, that's like not a big deal. But if you die with one of these clots, that's horrible. That's huge. Then they define the benefit of the vaccine. How many people are you saving versus what's the injury that the vaccine's causing? So the FDA itself won't approve a vaccine or authorize it unless the risk-benefit ratio clearly favors the vaccine. So if they find other safety data like this thrombosis, if this turns out to be true, then on every vaccine lot that gets shipped out for people, and I fully expect the vaccine to start being used again, there'll be a warning to say, 1 in a million young women may have this side effect. And so it's not the FDA that makes the recommendation for the immunization. The FDA just approves the vaccine for use. It's the doctors that actually make the recommendation, or clinicians, nurse practitioners, whoever it is that gives you that vaccine. They're the ones that match the vaccine's risks and benefits to you personally. And I just wanted to share with you that Pfizer, again, the first one out of the starting block, did their 12 to 15-year-old adolescent vaccine trials. The vaccine worked really well, and they're presenting their data to the FDA. So the vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds, so we'll have Pfizer from 12-year-olds on up. This should be presented to the committee and approved within probably just a month. So I know there are some of you in the audience who are 15 or younger siblings. If you're 12 and above, we may have a vaccine that we can give you within the next month or two, which I think is really good news. The vaccines for the younger kids are in trials, and the clinical trial design's been posted, but we don't expect the vaccine to be available, marketed, authorized until early next year. And I just wanted to share, we were talking about this briefly before we started our program. And this was from yesterday, updated just yesterday. 64.5% of San Diego County residents have had at least one dose of vaccine. And I'm just overjoyed. Tears come to my eyes. And we get herd immunity when we hit 70 to 80%. And you saw the data that 2 weeks after your first dose, you're probably protected. So this is just wonderful news that we're headed out of this nightmare. And I think, as Governor Newsom is saying, we may be able to let up these restrictions by mid-June. And I think that was my last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley. Families, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your virtual hand. You can also unmute yourselves. We are a smaller group, so that is okay. And use the chat option, and you can type your question in the chat, and we will call on you and get your questions or concerns answered.
I had a question about accessibility for that younger group, and even for the Pfizer 16 years old and up now. Do you have any knowledge of, like, is Rady's doing something specific, or how is it the parents can find the vaccine that's specifically for that age group, since Moderna and J&J isn't appropriate for that age group?
So great question. And Rady Children's is immunizing all 16 and above. So and actually at our hospital, 90% of the vaccine we get is Pfizer, and it's because we've got massive numbers of these minus 70-degree freezers. So we're well set to store the vaccine. So if you sign up, if you're 16 and above, and there you can go to the Rady Hospital site and sign up, or you can go to the county site, and I know they're working with Blue Cross or Blue Shield to My Turn site, but you can specify where you'd like to get the vaccine, so you can sign up for Rady also on the county's sites. And so if you come to us, you're likely to get the Pfizer vaccine. We give you the vaccine we have. That's that's authorized for you. So if you come to us and you're 16, Pfizer is the only vaccine you would get. If you're 18 and above, and we just got in a shipment from the county of Moderna that day, and we ran out of Pfizer, you'll get the Moderna. We are getting very little of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because other sites that can't store vaccine are preferentially being given it so they can distribute it much more easily. So we've only gotten like 100 doses out of the tens of thousands of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine in San Diego. So yeah, sign up. And I found out from Chris Abe, who's sort of overseeing our vaccine program, that there's open slots that we've tried to make it as available as possible. And every time we get a batch of vaccine from the county, we open up more slots because it's sort of, we find out only a day or two in advance. We're not able to open up vaccine slots for next week because we don't know if we'll have vaccine, and we don't want to give someone an appointment if we don't have vaccine. So, but thank you, Annie. That's a great question.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley. We have added 2 links to the chat as well, the My Turn California link, and then also the county. And then we're looking up the Rady's Children right now so that parents and families can sign up if that's what they're looking to do. We have a question from Tony Burnett.
I just wanted to know, hi, thank you for all this information. Like, I'm in. So I have a 16-year-old who actually just got his first shot on Saturday, Sunday. His little brother, 15. So if he gets approved, is it the exact same thing? Like if Pfizer is approved, is it the exact same thing?
Yep, exact same vaccine.
Okay.
And if you look at physiology and how the body responds to things, if you're 12 and above, for most drugs and vaccines, the immune response is virtually the same in the 12 to 15-year-old age group as it is 16 to 18 and above. For this vaccine, not wanting to take any chances, and this is an interesting story. The FDA, the clinical trial design was 18 and above for all the vaccines, even Pfizer. But there were a few hundred children that the Pfizer company got approval from the FDA to immunize who were 16 and above. And completely unexpected, the company asked the FDA for approval down to 16, even though there were only a couple hundred children in the trial, as opposed to thousands who were 18 and above. And for the group of doctors who were advising the FDA, there were actually 3 pediatricians that said, you can't ask for approval down to 16. You don't have the data. And the company said, yeah, but if you're above 12, all the data we have is that biologics act the same. And so the committee voted something like a 9 in favor of approving it down to 16, and only 3 said no. And the next day, the FDA approved it down to 16. So if you wonder, well, why does Pfizer have it down to 16 and Moderna doesn't? It's someone smart said, well, let's ask them for it. And all they can do is say, no, we're only going to give you to 18. And it worked. And the vaccine works really well in 16 to 18-year-olds. So I'm actually happy that we've got it down to that age group. And you're probably happy too. So did that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you, Doctor. Our next question comes from Victor Rojas's family, and then I do see one in the chat, and we'll get to that next. Victor?
Hi. My question is similar to the one that's in the chat. So if you're fully vaccinated, can you still be a carrier of the vaccine?
So I'm going to tell you 90% of the time, the answer is no. And I'm one of these people where the world is not black and white, it's shades of gray. So I will tell you percents for everything, but I want to assure you that it's highly unlikely But let me explain the scenario to you. If you've been vaccinated, you're very likely to be protected. So if someone with coronavirus who's sneezing and coughing and they're sick and they've got just hundreds of thousands of virus per drop of nasal secretions, and they sneeze on you, your mucous membranes are just going to get inundated, and you don't have enough antibody in your body at that moment or enough killer T cells to stop the infection in its tracks. And that's why there's not 100% protection. You can overwhelm immunity. So we know that you can be symptomatic with an intense exposure. And we know that a few percent of people can actually, if you're exposed, you can get asymptomatic infection. So that's the carrier that you're talking about. Can you carry the virus and not know it even after you've been immunized? And it turns out that's really uncommon. So of all the people who've been immunized, even if you're exposed to someone, there's less than 5% of people where you can actually find virus. So what I tell people is, even if you're immunized, don't go around sick people, or keep your mask on if someone's coughing and sneezing, because you don't want to get sick. Even if you do get sick, your disease will be really modified if you've been immunized. So if you can't avoid it, if you're like in a class or on a bus or something, and you turn around and someone sneezes at you and you go, oh no, you won't get so sick, but you might. So the answer to your question is, don't worry. If you've been immunized, you're not going to go around carrying it and spreading it. But it can happen, and it's been documented. And so the people who want to worry everyone about people who've even been immunized spreading it, it can occur, but it's not a big deal.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley. The question in the chat is similar, but focuses more on the people that have not been vaccinated. So a family of 5, 3 have been vaccinated because they meet the threshold, but they have 2 14-year-olds that are not currently vaccine eligible. So as the other 3 members start spreading their wings and socializing more, at what extent does the risk increase for the 14-year-olds to contract coronavirus?
So another good question. If these immunized people go out and start partying and get in close contact with people who are symptomatic, absolutely they can bring that virus back home and infect the younger people who haven't gotten vaccines. And that's not only true for 14-year-olds, but if you've got anyone at home who hasn't gotten the vaccine, all the way down to babies, they're at risk. So it can happen. Now, here's another public health twist to the answer to this question. And other than just using common sense and don't hang around symptomatic people, if you were to bring it home, so if you were to pick up something, at school or work or a party or something, and rubbed your nose and inoculated virus, and you did bring it home, the people who would get infected at home would generally have very mild disease. And you probably know, in San Diego, since the beginning of this pandemic, we've not had a single death. I'm going to knock on wood, not a single death in a child, period. Kids do really well. So even if for some reason you bring a virus home and other people in your house get infected, chances are they'll either have no symptoms at all, or they'll have mild symptoms and they'll never need a hospitalization. So from the public health standpoint, I don't want you to stay at home if you've been immunized because you're worried about bringing it home to susceptibles. I want you to go out and enjoy yourself. Just don't hang out with symptomatic people, or wear your mask if you have to be around them. But if you bring something home, it's no big deal. They'll do fine. It'll be like a cold to the younger kids. So I'm not worried about them.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Cordia C. Strong Reed. Has there been any testing or side effects in children under 15 if they were tested? Cordia, are you
So
talking about the vaccine? Could you clarify that?
Yes, I was talking about if they had tested with the vaccine, and yes.
Thank
So-
you.
yeah, so the side effect profile in 12 to 15-year-olds is the same as the side effect profile in adults. So a lot of people, you get the arm hurts, in maybe 10 to 20%, you feel yucky a day or 2 or 3 later, mild flu-like symptoms. I had those with my second dose. Sort of felt like I was getting influenza, 6 hours, and then it was gone. And of course, there's no influenza in town because everyone's wearing their masks. That's a small benefit for wearing the mask. But yeah, the side effect profile in 12 to 15s is exactly the same. The study in under 12, all of those, is going to be starting up any day now, and the FDA is collecting all the side effects on all of those children, and everyone that signs up for the study is in the study for 2 years. So when you agree to be part of the study, you agree to keep coming back for 2 years. So the FDA has safety data for you going out 2 years. So if there's any late problem, a year later, people get some weird kind of rash, the FDA will pick that up and share that with public health authorities. So same side effect profile.
We have another question from Selena Cohn. Does it hurt?
Yeah. Sorry, it hurts. It hurt more than the flu vaccine. So get it in the arm that you don't use. And if you sleep at night on one side, don't get it on the side that you sleep on, because your body, it'll hurt if you sleep on that side. But my wife didn't have pain at all. She thinks I'm a wimp. So it's very variable between people.
Thank you, doctor. Our next question comes from Yosef. I heard about the multi-system inflammatory syndrome affected youth who may have come in contact or contracted COVID-19. Are there any updates on this syndrome?
Yes. There's lots of information that we now have. So MISC, multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, is a late manifestation after you get the infection. So it occurs between 4 to 10 weeks or so after you get over it. And it's some unusual immune response that occurs in response to the virus. And we've seen this with other diseases before. There's something called rheumatic fever, which a lot of people have heard of. And in the days before we had penicillin for strep throat, something like 1 in 1,000 people would end up with rheumatic fever after their strep throat. And the body would think that there's strep still in your body, in your heart. So your body a month later would start attacking your heart and your heart valves, thinking that strep was there, and in fact it's not. So the most prominent hypothesis right now, because we don't know for sure, is that this is a late immune reaction, and the body is somehow believing that there's some component of virus that's still in the body that it's reacting to. But what we're now finding, though, is that although these kids, when they come in with persisting fevers or diarrhea, you don't really quite get the pneumonia that the adults get with active infection. But it's these fevers, which can be persistent and high, associated with a lot of inflammation from the blood tests. But you can get your heart pump function can be altered. So when kids come to the hospital with persisting fever, we check them all for evidence of infection. And we now have a blood test for past coronavirus infection that will let us know if you've been infected. And if you've been infected and you have these persisting fevers, then we do more things. We look at how well your heart works, whether you have rashes, which are part of this, all sorts of things. And then the good news is that as you get better, and we've got treatment for this with immune globulin, intravenous immune globulin, and steroids, dexamethasone, and there's some other anti-inflammatory drugs that we've picked up from other specialties. But with treatment, these kids get better amazingly fast. And for someone who's sick and maybe up in the ICU, 3-4 days later, they're going home feeling fine. So we're tracking them to see if there's late consequences, especially on those whose heart function decreases for a while. But right now, it's an unusual complication, and it's one that looks like it doesn't have lasting effects. And again, when we identify these kids in the hospital, we take extra precautions with them and don't let them get sicker, and we treat them really early. So we haven't lost a single child to MIS-C either. So there's a lot to learn about it. So even though we've got sort of up-to-date information, there's a lot of information yet that we don't know.
Thank you, Doctor. We have 2 last questions, and I just want to let everyone know that we'll go about 5 minutes over our time. It is now 7 o'clock, but we want to make sure we get these questions answered. This is also from Yosef. To your knowledge on the history of vaccinations or medication, how long does it typically take for a researcher or professional like yourself to see signs of potential long-term consequences? I ask this in relation to the mRNA vaccinations.
So this is someone who's going to go into the health field, I can tell. There's short-term vaccine reactions, and I hope I can explain this fully because this is very important. There's short-term reactions, and you look for swelling at the site of the injection, fever, all those things that we see with influenza routinely. And then there's long-term side effects, these autoimmune things. People are worried that you might see MIS-C in children who get the vaccine. And in the vaccine protocols, there's a specific safety inquiry into whether some kids are getting this. And this will be placebo controlled. So some kids will get salt water, some kids will get the vaccine. So we'll know. Most vaccine side effects, you'll know within 2 months, probably 80%. You'll know 90 to 95% within a year. But there may be late side effects that will go up to 2 years, which is why the FDA is tracking everyone for 2 years. And if they find a problem, like someone's toes are falling off at 2 years, then they'll extend the follow-up for 4 years or 8 years, and whatever it takes to make sure that the vaccines are fully characterized for safety, the FDA has the authority to do. So I have, 3 or 4 answers to your question. Short term is within just a week or two, midterm up to 2 months, long term 1 to 2 years. And we look at all of those.
We're so thankful that you are looking at all of those. And our last question is, does the vaccine pose any risk for pregnant women, such as severe illness or even premature birth?
No. And that's a question that's been asked a lot. And we give lectures virtually every week to our hospital. And as you might imagine, we've got hundreds of nurses, a surprising number of whom, are pregnant or contemplating pregnancy. So this is a very important question in our healthcare institution. And, I don't go around asking if people are pregnant, but there's statistics on the rate of pregnancy. And so we've specifically combed the literature. Every report that comes out, we look at safety, and there's no signal that's come out to make us worried. There were some rumors that were out there that the vaccine components some came from placentas. That's absolutely not true. Absolutely. But once it gets out there on the internet, boy, it just spreads like wildfire. So every study, and there's one that was just published this week from the CDC that looked at safety in pregnant women. And so far, knock on wood, there have been no adverse events in pregnancy, which is a small miracle. So pregnant women are at risk of having more severe disease. And if there's any group that you want to protect, it's the women who are taking care of children in the hospital. So no safety issues right now, but we're continuing to look at it. So far, so good.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bradley. Again, thank you so much, families, for joining us. There's just so much information out there, and it's really, really important to get the right answers, the real answers, and not the misinformation or the fear information that is out there on the internet.
And I just want to add, my daughter got pregnant during all of this, and she said, "Dad, should I get the vaccine?" And I said, "Yes." So I practice what I preach. I'm sorry, Hina, didn't mean to
No, not at all.
No, congratulations.
Thank
That's
you.
Wonderful.
Congratulations.
A beautiful baby boy.
I also want to say to the families here that I trust Dr. Bradley very implicitly, because he actually diagnosed my younger sister about 20 years ago with an infectious disease. She is alive and well and happy now, but it was something that was mystifying many doctors, and he was able to pinpoint what it was, and she had surgery, and she's alive and well. So to have him join that and come and share with the families that I have here, the Cardinals and Fellows, really means a lot to me as well. We do have additional information. The governor of California is hosting a vaccine pop-up on Saturday. The link is in the chat, and here is the flyer as well. I just wanted to show that quickly. It is Saturday, April 24th. If you click on that link, you can make an appointment for yourself or anyone 16 years and older.
That one is actually 18 and up, because that one is Moderna.
Yeah.
But please, if you are having any trouble getting access to vaccine or know of anyone of a fellow or a cardinal having trouble finding an appointment, please let us know. We were more than happy to use our connections and our resources to make sure that anyone that wants a vaccine is able to get a vaccine. So Saturday, you can click on that link and sign up, but that's 18 and up.
Thank you so much again. And typically we have a tradition here where we unmute everyone so that Dr. Bradley can hear all of your voices to thank him. And thank you again for your time, for the families as well for joining to get the information, because I know you will share that with your other family members. You'll share it with your communities, and this is the way to get the right information out there. And we appreciate everyone again for being here, especially Dr. Bradley.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Cardinals. Bye, Fellows. Thank you so
Pleasure.
much.
Good
Bye-bye.
night, families.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
My husband is listening over my shoulder, and he wants us to mention that folks that are undocumented, it's a great site for them, that no one's asking for documentation or anything like that. This is all about health. So I'm probably 3 minutes late saying that, but if you can make sure that message goes on for folks, there'll be bilingual staff there. And again, it's meant for folks, whether or not they have status, that this is about health.
All right.
We can stop the recording, Ken.
Thank you guys. This was great. Han, you did awesome. This was amazing. So thank you so much for putting this together.